So the first part of that reading today is kind of weird, right? It's a little odd to us, to our ears. Naomi says to Ruth, now we met Naomi and Ruth last week, but Naomi says to Ruth, go to the threshing floor and uncover the feet of Boaz and lie with him. So a couple of things, and so this isn't the crux of the sermon, but just a couple of things, because that's a passage that really doesn't really strike our ear well. So first thing is that this was a very dangerous situation that Ruth was putting herself into. Very dangerous because on the threshing floor, all of the men would have been there together drinking and having like numerous libations. And and Naomi tells Ruth when they're finished, and when Boaz goes and lies down, now he's drunk, but so are all of the other men around. Now you're going to go down and you're going to be dressed to the nines, we would say, and you're going to lie with Boaz. So just imagine a single woman, remember, a Moabite, so a foreign woman. Moabites had a reputation for being somewhat unscrupulous, and she's going down into the threshing floor. The second thing is, we don't really get the gist of the uncovering the feet. So in Scripture, uncovering the feet was a euphemism for something else. And so Ruth was going down and placing herself into a very precarious situation with Boaz. It could have turned out 100 different ways, but the story tells us that Boaz takes her as his wife. Now, there's all kinds of reason for that happening. There's all kinds of history, but I don't want to talk about that today. That would be the subject of a really interesting Bible study that could be coming soon. But what I do want to talk about is the last verses. So we heard up to verse 17. Verse 18 actually gives us a lineage for Boaz leading down to David. Now we all know, or I think we know, that David is regarded as the greatest king in the history of Israel. And so David has a lineage, an ancestry, and we know from Matthew's gospel that the lineage goes through to David, and then from David to Jesus, and Jesus has to be born of the house of David. That's part of the prophecy, that's part of what was expected. And so that's part of our story. But an interesting part of this story is that without that experience between Ruth and Boaz, without that experience, David is not born. Right? There is no David. Without Boaz and Obed, there is no David. And so without Ruth, a Moabite woman, the history of Israel, the story of Israel, does not happen. And what's really interesting in Matthew's gospel is that Matthew, and we do this every once in a while, I do anyway, I have the whole genealogy read during worship. It's long, and there are a lot of names that are hard to pronounce. And the person who reads on that day always has a grumpy face when they see me for like a month, right? But in the lineage, there are 4 women who are named, and that's strange. So Israel, the people of Israel, were matrilineal, still are matrilineal, which means that you are a Jew if you are born to a woman who's a Jew. But when they offer genealogies, it's the men who are named. So we have so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. And it's the fathers who are named. Except that in Matthew's genealogy, there are 4 women who are named. And the question has always been, why are these 4 women named? And I'm going to tell you who they are. One is Ruth, who is named along with Boaz. Another is Rahab, who was a prostitute who housed or hid 2 spies, Levite spies, during one of the battle's wars. The third is Tamar. Tamar was the daughter-in-law to Judah, who was widowed twice. So Judah's son died, so she married his other son. He died, and then Tamar tricked Judah into impregnating her and then marrying her. And she was the son of Perez, who we heard named in the passage, or in the passage that Rick just read. And the last one is Bathsheba. And Bathsheba, we all know Bathsheba, right? Bathsheba is the woman who, so the story says that she was an adulteress who was with David. Now, calling her an adulteress is kind of a stretch, since David actually forced her into a relationship and then had her husband killed, right? So all of these pieces are, Matthew, I think, is trying to share with us who hear it, who hear the story, that all people, everybody, there's a potential for all of us to be part of the story of God. David, regarded as the greatest king in Israel's history, had a number of, like, Bathsheba wasn't his only foray into what we would think a little less than holy. Ruth, Tamar, Rahab, and Bathsheba all bring the story together, but all come from what the people in the day would have thought a little bit risque. And I think that Matthew includes them in the story to remind us that God, first of all, God works in mysterious ways, but also that God can enter into the life of anybody, and bring out the miraculous. Bring out the miraculous. We hold on to those stories. We hold on to that. We want to hear those names. We want to hear the names of those women. We want to hear the story of their bravery. I mean, Rahab hiding Levite spies in her home reminds us that during World War II, Jews were hidden in the homes of ordinary people who stepped way beyond what would have been expected to save the lives of people that some of whom they knew and some of them whom they had no clue who they were. But they did know that if they were caught, they would have been punished, imprisoned, and probably executed. Ruth and Tamar finding that glimpse of hope in a story that was just dreadful, and stepping way beyond, putting themselves in incredible places of danger again, in order to enhance or move forward their own lives, but in the end, move forward the life and the story of Israel. we need to be reminded of that over and over and over again because, and here's why it's important to us, because it is really easy for us, for me, to say, why would God ever consider using me? What do I have to offer? And even more importantly, if you knew what I have done. You know, we all carry around these guilts and the parts of our lives that we don't necessarily share out loud. And we hold that and we diminish ourselves in our own eyes as a result of those stories. It would have been easy for Ruth to go back to her home, to her parents, to not venture into that unknown that I talked about last week. It would have been easy for Tamar or Rahab to not have done what they did. Bathsheba is a different story, and again, that's a different sermon, actually. But they didn't. And because they didn't, we are here in this place now celebrating and worshiping together. And so I encourage you. I encourage you to consider yourself, as Scripture says, beloved of God. To consider yourselves always graced with God's presence. To open yourself to the miracles that surround you. To open yourselves to the miracle that you are. Each of you, each of us, is a miracle, a walking miracle. Blessed by God, but called and commissioned to not hold that information to ourselves, but to be generous in our offering it to others, so that they will see not only the miracle that you are, but the miracle that they are. That they will see not only that you are blessed, but that they are blessed. That they, like you, like us, walk with God every moment of every day. The stories of Scripture are there to inform, but to inspire. We look to Scripture for the motivation for our lives, but we walk with Scripture because Scripture offers us the journey, the pathway that we are to follow. And that pathway is a pathway built on and leading to a love that we cannot understand, but a love that is freely offered to each one of us, and that we are blessed to be able to carry to others. So, as we remember our stories, let them not simply be words on a page, but let them be written upon our hearts, that we know that God is present always, that we are loved, we are blessed, and that we can inform and inspire others to know themselves to be so also. Thanks be to God.